Okay, guys, so I just want to share some ideas around considerations for return to tennis. So here in the UK, we've just or on the verge of coming out of lockdown and starting to get back to tennis. So for some of us, probably haven't been playing tennis for quite a while, maybe around 3 or more months, which can obviously lead to some issues. So what kind of specifically do we need to do, and how do we actually get back to the court? So I always like to think about starting with the end in mind. Okay, so just like when you go on a car journey, you go on a long journey, or even if you're just moving around the city, you always know where you're going when you get into the car. Okay, so you type your postcode into the navigation system because you've got that goal destination in mind. Okay, so I think what we do when we return to the court needs to be exactly the same. We need to have that goal tennis volume of what we are trying to get back to before lockdown in mind as well. Okay, so this roadmap, so to speak, helps reduce the likelihood of taking a wrong turn, and that wrong turn in our kind of context that we're going to speak about today is an injury. So how do injuries actually happen? All right, so if we keep it pretty simple, it's where the demands of the task exceed the capacity of the tissue. So if you just look on the right hand side of the screen here, you can see injury happens when demands exceed capacity, and no injury when the demands are below the capacity. Now, as a result of more than likely sitting around for 3+ months and not doing much physical activity in general, our actual capacity is going to be lower than it was obviously before we went into lockdown. So it's now our job to start building that back up and return to tennis in a sensible and step-by-step manner. Okay, so quite simply, injuries happen from doing too much too soon, and 70% of all tennis injuries are overuse, which is too much too soon. So what are the actual risk factors? Well, there's two different types of risk factors, the acute and the chronic. From an acute standpoint, mobility could have changed. So muscles have got tighter, less range of motion around a joint. Tighter muscles or less pliable muscles can increase the risk of injury, and we are more likely, if our muscles are really tight just from sitting, they're not prepared, there's an increased risk of injury there. So it's just something to think about. Joint stability could have gone down as well because it's potentially not as strong as we once were. We haven't been moving around the court like we used to, hitting the weights like we used to, and things like that. So as a result, stability goes down, potential for injury goes up. Technical mastery is a big one here. Because we haven't been striking many tennis balls over the last few months, if any tennis balls, our hand-eye coordination could have gone down, and our feel for the ball and everything. As a result, our biomechanics might have gone kind of slightly out of whack, so to speak. So when we strike the ball, we may be striking in a slightly different position, which can lead to these overuse injuries on the chronic side. So constant repetition of a skill performed poorly or not with the correct technique is going to lead to these overuse injuries. And then the other one here as well is high velocity. So no one ever got injured sitting on the couch, okay? Safest place in the world. But we don't play tennis sitting on a couch, so we want to get out and start getting used to these high velocity kind of actions, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So if we sprint around the court, high intensity sprinting, change direction, that's where the injuries are more likely to occur. On the chronic side of things, we've already discussed the overuse injuries from doing too much too soon. And as a result of doing too much too soon as well, we can actually, if we have poor recovery, that's going to impact and increase our likelihood of injury. So we're essentially more or less kind of dealt two different scenarios when we return to tennis. Scenario one is going to be where we just come back into tennis and we try to do what we did 3 months ago when we were playing tennis. Okay, but realistically, our bodies probably aren't going to be too prepared for that. So we go back with all the best intentions in the world. We start off, maybe we say, okay, well, we used to play for 10 hours, so we're just going to go straight back into 10 hours now. We do that weeks 1, 2, and weeks 3. By the time we get into week 3, we start getting a few kind of nagging pains, maybe in our elbow and things like that. And then by the time we get to week 4, we just decide, all right, week 3 was tough. We're going to have to pull back on some tennis volume, so we're down to 6 hours. Same thing happens in that week 4. Elbow's still sore. We drop it down to 4 hours. and then down to 2, and then we stay at 2 just so we're still doing something, but we're pretty frustrated by this point that we can't keep playing tennis. In this period, if you look at the right, the demands have essentially exceeded the capacity of the tissue at that current time. So that's where our injury took place. And as a result of these first 7 weeks of activity back out of lockdown, we managed 44 hours of tennis. Now, if we look at scenario 2 here, we take a slightly different approach. We take a progressive and a long-term approach, starting with the end in mind, like we talked about with our roadmap analogy, where we start with a kind of a lower volume. Okay, so we're going to start with 5 hours with our goal being 10. So we're starting at 50% of our target volume. Then we progress that by 1 hour each week. So we get back by week 6 to 10 hours. Okay, now we know from the research, if we just progress our volume by 10 to 15% weekly, then we're going to be in a pretty good place to be able to adapt. It's going to allow our body to recover and adapt over time so we can get stronger and increase our capacity. Okay, so crucially, if we look at the right here, our demands are not exceeding the capacity of the body, so we do not get injured. As a result, week 6, we're back at our previous training load. Week 7, we can continue at that, or if we really wanted to, we could go up to potentially 11 hours if we're feeling fantastic. As a result, scenario 2 gives us 55 hours of total tennis hours over those 7 weeks versus 44 in the previous scenario. So what do I actually recommend from a training standpoint? Well, I think first and foremost, like we've already discussed, we need to identify what your normal training week used to look like and identify a training goal for that. So what's that going to look like this time? Are we going back to that, if we stick with the 10 hours, are we going to go back to try and get back to 10 hours down the line? Okay. Once you've identified that, work back to your current situation, and then we're going to look to bridge this gap using a long-term volume progression. Okay. To do this, we need to communicate that information very clearly with your coaches, okay? Because they're the ones that are going to help you be putting your program together. So we've got to be able to do that and just communicate and understand where you're at versus where you want to get to, okay? Now, my recommendations are, if you've been doing nothing, start at 50%. Just start at 50%, okay? Get back into it and then just progress by that 10% each week, like that previous example. If you've been doing something, now something may be going for a few runs per week, playing with your brother and sisters, where you've been maybe throwing a ball, just doing general like physical activity. You've been doing some Zoom sessions and things like that, some online fitness, working with an S&C coach. Start at 60% and then bridge it back from there. If you've been doing everything, you're one of the lucky ones, you've got a tennis court at home, you've maybe got a gym at home and things like that, recommend it starting at 80 to 90%. Now you might think, why 80, 90%? Because we've been doing everything. But I guarantee you, if you've been playing tennis at home with your brother or sister, the intensity is not quite the same as playing with maybe teammates or people like that at the academies, because the intensity is just not there as it is if you're maybe hitting really hard with your teammates or even drilling aggressively with your coach and things like that. Now that's again a conversation starter to have with your coach, so they can see kind of where you're at and how much you've been doing. But these are just guidelines that you can think about when having those conversations with your coaches. So what can you do to help? Apart from, like we said already, communicate with your coach and identify that training practice goal. Okay, the tennis practice goal, sorry. So you can actually train. It's not too late. I know we've only got a week or so to go now before we get back, but you can still do something to help bridge that gap. So if you've got a skipping rope, then just grab that skipping rope, jump rope, get out and do some skipping in the garden. Just pick 3 minutes, try and go for that. If you're really bad at skipping, just try it, start at 30 seconds. You can also do sprinting as well. Like we said, no one ever got injured sitting on the couch. So we want to start getting our body used to those high velocity muscle actions that we talked about. So find a hill, sprint up that hill 10 times, okay? Walk back recovery, as soon as you get to the bottom, go again. Do that maybe twice a week, even if you're on the flat as well. Hit a few sprints on the flat, just build it up and get used to it and get your body like inoculated to that stress. Throwing as well. Throwing is a great way to prepare your body for serving. So get a tennis ball, throw it against the wall, hit a certain amount of reps there and just increase that maybe throughout the week. Even if you're just going in the garden, throwing your brother and sister, just kind of repping that out, just getting the shoulder just ready and moving through that range of motion is going to be better than doing nothing. We can go for a run. One of my favorites is go 10 minutes out on a run and then try and get back in the next 10 minutes. Okay. If you went out too hot, you're not going to get back in that time. So it's hard but sustainable work. If you're thinking, whoa, Chris, 10 minutes is a lot, maybe just cut that down to 5 and do the same thing. Okay. If you don't want to go for a run, maybe you just hit some intervals in the garden. 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off, 2 sets of 10, take 3 minutes rest between sets. Something nice and easy that's going to get you moving in kind of a shuttle format as well. Okay. Also, like we've said before, we've got to be specific to the sport. Kicking a football around in the garden and park or whatever is fantastic, but unfortunately we don't swing a tennis racket with our foot. So we've got to get used to the upper body used to those stresses as well. So things like hitting the volley against a house, building up some higher volume in there, maybe ground strokes against the side of the house as well, is going to better prepare the shoulder and elbow tissues for return to tennis than just kicking a football around the garden. And then just finally, Lauren's been doing a fantastic job with her S&C Zoom sessions. So jump on those if you haven't already. That's going to help with your injury prevention and things like that as well. So like I say, if you haven't, jump onto that. It's better late than never. And yeah, helping bridge that gap on our return to tennis. Now, thank you very much. If you do have a question, feel free to just shoot me an email there. Or if you prefer to go through social media, then that's my social media as well. Thanks for listening and have a great day.